On the afternoon of March 7, 1945, Second Lieutenant Karl Timmermann of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion stood on the west bank of the Rhine River and stared at something that shouldn't exist: an intact bridge. For 3 years, the Allies had been fighting their way across Europe, and in all that time, they had captured exactly 0 bridges across major rivers intact. The Germans, masters of demolition, destroyed every bridge before retreating. But here, at the small German town of Remagen, the Ludendorff Bridge, a massive railway bridge built in World War I, still stood, connecting the western and eastern banks of the Rhine. Timmermann, a Nebraska native who had fought across France and Belgium since D-Day, knew immediately that this was important. The Rhine was the last major natural barrier protecting Germany. Every Allied plan assumed that crossing the Rhine would require massive preparation: pontoon bridges, amphibious assaults, extensive air and artillery support. But if this bridge could be captured intact, an entire division could be across the Rhine within hours. The war could be shortened by weeks, maybe months. But there was a problem. The bridge was German-held, and even as Timmermann watched, he could see German combat engineers working frantically on the structure. They were clearly preparing to blow the bridge. The question was whether the Americans could capture it before the Germans destroyed it. The commander of Combat Command B, 9th Armored Division, Brigadier General Hogue, made the decision within minutes of receiving the report. He ordered Timmermann's company, Company A, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, to seize the bridge immediately. There was no time for careful planning, no time for artillery preparation, no time for anything except a direct assault. Timmermann would take his company, approximately 120 men, across 400 yards of open ground, then across 1,000-foot bridge that the Germans could blow up at any moment, and establish a bridgehead on the eastern bank. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. But Timmermann also knew that opportunities like this came once in a war, if that. He assembled his platoon leaders and gave them the situation. We're taking that bridge. If it blows up under us, at least we tried. If we make it across, we've just changed the war. Questions? There were no questions. The men of Company A had been fighting together for months. They trusted their officers, they trusted each other, and they understood what was at stake. At 3:15 p.m., Timmermann gave the order: move out. The company advanced in 2 columns, using buildings along the riverbank for cover. German machine guns opened fire from the bridge towers. Massive stone structures at each end of the bridge that dominated the approaches. American tank destroyers returned fire, their 76mm guns hammering the towers. The noise was deafening. Machine guns, tank cannons, rifle fire, all echoing off the stone buildings of Remagen. Sergeant Joseph Delizio led the first squad across the bridge approach. A German machine gun in the left tower caught them in the open, and 3 men went down. Delizio, a combat veteran who had earned a Silver Star at the Battle of the Bulge, kept moving. He reached the base of the tower, pulled a satchel charge from his pack, set the timer for 10 seconds, and tossed it through the firing port. The explosion silenced the machine gun.
But now came the hard part: crossing the bridge itself. The Ludendorff Bridge was 1,069 feet long and ran parallel to the river before making a sharp turn toward the eastern bank. It had a wooden plank deck for vehicles, with railway tracks down the center. The sides were open, metal framework with no protection from enemy fire. Anyone crossing would be completely exposed to German fire from the eastern bank. Timmermann went first. It was the only way. He couldn't order his men to do something he wouldn't do himself. He stepped onto the bridge deck and started walking, then running. Behind him, the rest of Company A followed. The Germans on the eastern bank opened fire with everything they had. Bullets spanged off the metal framework. Mortar rounds exploded on the wooden deck. One man fell, then another, then 3 more in quick succession. Halfway across, Timmermann spotted something that made his blood run cold. Explosive charges wired to the bridge's support cables. The Germans had set demolition charges along the entire length of the bridge. They could blow it at any moment. Timmermann shouted for engineers. Sergeant John Reynolds, a combat engineer attached to Company A, moved forward and began cutting wires. He worked methodically, clipping each wire he could reach, knowing that any one of them might trigger the charges. At 4 p.m., the Germans attempted to blow the bridge. A massive explosion shook the structure. Timmermann was thrown to the deck by the blast, but when the smoke cleared, the bridge still stood. The demolition had been only partially successful. Some charges had detonated, damaging the bridge's superstructure, but the main supports held. Later investigation revealed that German engineers, working in haste and under fire, had used inferior explosives, commercial blasting caps instead of military-grade detonators. Some charges simply failed to fire. Timmermann got to his feet and kept moving. His men followed. They reached the eastern bank at 4:10 p.m., less than an hour after beginning the assault. Company A had captured the first intact bridge across the Rhine, and they'd done it with casualties remarkably light given the circumstances. 8 men wounded, none killed. But the fight was far from over. The German forces on the eastern bank, a mixed group of engineers, infantry replacements and anti-aircraft gunners pressed into service as infantry, fought almost immediately. These were not elite troops, but they fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland. For the next 6 hours, Timmermann's company fought off repeated German attempts to retake the bridge. The critical moment came around midnight. A German assault gun, a Stug 3 tank destroyer, emerged from the darkness and began firing at point-blank range into the American positions. Timmermann's men had no anti-tank weapons heavy enough to penetrate its armor. Private First Class Alex Drabick, who had been one of the first men across the bridge, remembered a bazooka team that had been killed during the crossing. He ran back across the bridge under fire, retrieved the bazooka and 2 rockets from the dead men, ran back to the eastern bank, and stalked the German assault gun through the darkness. At a range of 30 yards, he fired both rockets in quick succession. The first missed. The second penetrated the assault gun's rear armor and set it ablaze.
By dawn on March 8th, the American bridgehead on the eastern bank was secure. Engineers had cleared most of the demolition charges from the bridge and were beginning repairs. The 27th Armored Infantry Battalion had been reinforced by 2 more infantry companies and a company of tank destroyers. And most importantly, word of the bridge's capture had reached every American unit within 50 miles. General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, received the news at his headquarters and immediately understood its significance. He ordered every available unit to exploit the bridgehead. "Push everything you can across that bridge," he told General Omar Bradley. Within 24 hours, over 8,000 American soldiers had crossed the Rhine at Remagen. Within a week, the bridgehead had expanded to include over 50,000 troops and was 10 miles deep. The Germans recognized the disaster. Adolf Hitler, at his headquarters in Berlin, flew into a rage when informed that the bridge had been captured intact. He ordered an immediate court-martial of the officers responsible for defending Remagen. 4 officers were quickly tried and executed, a pointless cruelty that did nothing to change the military situation, but reflected Hitler's deteriorating mental state. The German military response was more practical, but equally futile. Every available unit, including formations desperately needed elsewhere, was thrown at the Remagen bridgehead in an attempt to reduce it. The Luftwaffe, which barely existed as an effective force by March 1945, launched desperate attacks on the bridge using jet fighters, conventional bombers, and even V-2 rockets. None succeeded in destroying the bridge, though they did damage it further. On March 17th, 10 days after its capture, the Ludendorff Bridge finally collapsed. The damage from the German demolition attempt, combined with heavy use and the stress of supporting thousands of vehicles crossing daily, proved too much. The bridge fell into the Rhine, killing 28 American engineers who were working on it. But by then, the bridge had served its purpose. American engineers had erected several pontoon bridges alongside it, and the flow of men and material across the Rhine continued uninterrupted. Lieutenant Karl Timmermann, who had led the initial assault, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. He survived the war and returned to Nebraska, where he worked as a teacher and rarely spoke about Remagen. When asked about the bridge, he would say, "We did what we were trained to do. The Germans made mistakes, and we took advantage of them. That's war." But veterans on both sides recognized that Remagen was more than just tactical opportunism. It represented a moment when courage, quick decision-making, and willingness to take calculated risks changed the course of history. The German defenders fought honorably, but were overwhelmed by circumstances. The American attackers took a gamble that could easily have killed them all, but instead opened the gateway to Germany and shortened the war. Sergeant Joseph Delizio, who had silenced the first machine gun tower, returned to Remagen in 1985 for a ceremony marking the 40th anniversary of the bridge's capture. He stood on the west bank, the eastern bank, and the bridge towers were in what was then East Germany and inaccessible, and reflected on what had happened. "We were just soldiers doing our jobs, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, doing your job at the right moment makes a difference. That bridge made a difference."